memes, some more for all sorts of things.
Is that what you use at work, or?
Yeah. All right. So we're broadcasting and we are live. So, hello everyone and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis.
I'm Mike McTean.
And we started our podcast by watching through the American Film Institute's top 100 movies, but then we finished that list, and so it's watching 100 movies and more. So tonight our theme of sorts kind of started with the idea of there are a lot of people and filmmakers and actors and actresses and so on that are represented on the AFI list. But those people did other movies that are not on the list. And so the idea was like, let's talk about what are some of the movies that might represent those people better than the ones that are on the list and talk about if we should swap them out. And so my suggestion for that is Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious, which could be an Alfred Hitchcock movie that we swap out, could be a Cary Grant movie that we swap out, could be an Ingrid Bergman or Claude Rains movie that we swap out. Although probably we're not going to swap out the Ingrid Bergman Claude Rains movie that's already on the list
I'm not.
because that's Casablanca. So yeah, I mean I like Notorious an awful lot, but I'm not going to switch it for Casablanca. Anyway, and Mike's suggestion. Would you like to introduce your suggestion?
Yeah, I went with The Departed. Um, it's I can't remember. Are there? There's got. Oh yeah, Jack Nicholson's in a couple. Some of these,
Yeah.
but it was primarily the Leonardo DiCaprio one that I wanted to put on there because as as good as he is in Titanic, and Titanic's not on here just because of his performance,
Right.
but this is one of his best performances.
Mm-hmm.
And he's delivered a lot, but this particular movie, and we'll kind of get into performances in general with both these movies, but um, these are very much actor-driven movies.
Right. And even though I kind of framed it that way,
This,
hmm?
I mean actor in the actor and
Oh
actress.
yes, of course.
Term.
So even though I kind of framed it that way, we don't necessarily have to focus this on the idea of like we're definitely going to switch it out for something, or does it count for that? Like it's really more a matter of like you said, for example, we might say we don't switch it out for Titanic because Titanic belongs there still for other reasons. But if we wanted to say, what is a movie that would better capture Leonardo DiCaprio's strengths as an actor? But for that matter, I mean, The Departed also would cover, as you mentioned, Jack Nicholson. Um, I guess there's a couple of Matt Damon movies in here, right? Or at the very least, he's got the small part in Saving Private Ryan. Um,
Scorsese.
but yeah, Scorsese is kind of actually where I was trying to get to. But yeah, I kind of got sidetracked on the Matt Damon off ramp. So so those are the two movies we're going to be talking about tonight. So um, do you have preference on which we do first?
I do not.
Okay, well, I guess we might as well do them in the order then that I introduced them, and we'll start with Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious. Now, before we get into it, I'm going to tell a brief anecdote, and it might at first seem like it has nothing to do with this, but you'll see when it gets there. So, I have been rewatching the Star Wars Clone Wars cartoon because there is a podcast where a bunch of people that I really respect their opinions and enjoy them are doing a rewatch podcast of that show, and it's called A More Civilized Age. And so I have been rewatching that show along with their episode sequence, meaning I'm watching the episodes that they're going to discuss in their next episode. So the very night after I watched Notorious, I went to go watch the next episode of Clone Wars that was just the next in the series as I was doing the rewatch. And it was a season 2 episode called Senate Spy. And the plot of this episode is that there is a suspicion that there is a senator who is collaborating with the separatists because, of course, this takes place during the prequel series. And uh, it turns out that Padme, Queen Amidala, now Senator Amidala, used to date this senator. Sort of. He was into her, she wasn't as into him. And so the Jedi Council tells Anakin they would like him to have her go pretend to get back with this guy so she can find out if he is actually a separatist spy or not. And he's not feeling very good about this because, of course, in secret, he's actually married to Padme. But he can't tell them that. And so then we have lots of confusion and miscommunication where she has to pretend to actually like this senator guy, even though she really doesn't. And Anakin is jealous, but he can't say anything. So you see where the connection comes in, and it was a bizarre coincidence that that was just the very next episode of Clone Wars after I watched Notorious.
That is really funny, actually.
Because the thing is, it's not a mere similarity. It is obviously, when you watch the episode, a direct, purposeful homage to Notorious, like complete with matching shots and music stings and everything. So it was kind of funny just because I had seen that episode before, but I did not remember that that was the one that it was. But it's funny just because that is not the only other piece of media that we have talked about where Notorious came up. Because of course, when we did our Mission Impossible series, Mission Impossible 2 borrows this plot as well. With Ethan recruits this great thief, and he's kind of into her, but then it turns out, whoops, you were actually supposed to recruit her because she's the ex-girlfriend of this bad guy that we need to infiltrate. And so, you know, they do the Notorious thing there too. But the actual movie, Alfred Hitchcock's movie, 1946, starring Cary Grant, Ingrid Bergman, and Claude Rains. Cary Grant as the handler for this agent, Ingrid Bergman as the woman whose father worked for the Nazis. And she disapproved of that, but that's not publicly known because she didn't really ever say anything in public about it. And so people just kind of assumed, well, it's because of her father, right? But the government knows she actually doesn't approve, and so they decide, hey, there's this other guy that worked for the Nazis too, and we know he used to be into you. We want you to go in and spy on him. But only this discovery, Cary Grant is supposed to be her handler, but this discovery is only made after he met her at a party and they kind of, developed an infatuation with one another. And it was only after that that they discovered what the intent of this plan was. So the plot is suspenseful as she's trying to spy on Claude Rains' character. And there's tension there, but it's also tension, and the primary conflict I think of the movie comes from the fact that Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman obviously have real feelings for each other, but it's all wrapped up in international espionage and jealousy and hurt feelings and bad communication. So, um,
And a
this,
wine cellar.
hmm?
And a wine cellar.
Yes, wine cellar. Um, Wine bottles filled with uranium ore, apparently. Um, Now, it's interesting because this movie, I don't know that it's actually the origin of the term MacGuffin, but it's certainly the example given when I first learned the term. I perhaps could have looked up the actual detail of that because I believe that the terminology does come from a Hitchcock quote. But the idea of uranium ore in a wine bottle, like, why is that the thing? It doesn't really matter. I mean, they kind of put a name on it just so it's something important that they have to get. But the movie's not really about that.
Right.
It could have been anything. And so the idea of a MacGuffin is just it's the thing you have to get. where the actual conflict is about trying to get a thing. It doesn't matter what the thing is.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, the reason I brought it up, and also why it's interesting, like what you were just talking about,
Mm-hmm.
is that I saw this movie when I was much younger, and so to me, this MacGuffin is so effective. That's the part that I remembered
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't get the interpersonal drama part of it because I was too. I was. I mean, I was old enough to understand the movie. You know, probably in my tweens or early teens, but didn't quite get the rest of it. But this whole part, like, is one that I understood.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always been my memory, which is why I say when you say there's this whole thing, and I'm like, well, and the wine cellar. And I think I even brought that up when we talked about Mission Impossible.
Uh-huh.
I think I made a joke like when you said, "Oh, this is very much like Notorious." I said, "There's no wine cellar,"
Well,
because that's what's embedded in my
mm-hmm.
deeper subconscious of remembering this movie. Now I've seen it many times since then, and I know the plot and I know what makes it good. It's just funny how these things work,
Yeah.
but it's why it's so effective is because it's a very good mechanism to kind of move the story along. You know,
It's a perfect illustration of what is meant by layered storytelling. Because you can watch, understand, and enjoy this movie purely on the level of it being a spy story, right? Like that, it works on that level, right? Just the tension of, oh, this is a bad guy working for worse guys. We got to find out what he's doing and stop him, right? And characters that we're interested in are trying to do that, and it's hard. And that's a story that works, and the movie functions effectively on that level. With there's no holes in it. It just functions on that level. But there is also that other layer of the emotional dynamics and interplay between Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman, and then also the dynamic between Ingrid Bergman and Claude Rains, because she's having to, just, the sexual politics of her having to pretend to love someone that she doesn't love really because he's a bad guy. And especially later when she occasionally is in real danger and has to try to diffuse it by seducing him, and that's obviously awkward and uncomfortable for her, but in a lot of ways she is doing it because she likes Cary Grant and he's asking her to, even though he doesn't really want to ask her to. He kind of wants her to say no, I won't, but he won't say that he wants her to say no, I won't. So she's trying to do it to please him, even though she doesn't like it, and it's a mess. These two poor people that I guess maybe they get more or less. This is a more or less happy ending for these two at the end. The bad guy gets his in a pretty dramatic way, or at least it's suggested that he will. She is almost poisoned to death, but we are given to understand that she will be taken to a hospital and treated. Um, and it has now been made clear, the unspoken tension that they do actually love each other has kind of been demonstrated, even though because essentially what happens at the end is that well, I don't know. So just to briefly fill out the rest of the synopsis for anyone who hasn't seen this movie. um, so she is going in. She is pretending. She knows Claude Rains used to have a crush on her when she was living with her father, and they were working together. They're in Rio now, and it's Claude Rains' character is working for like ex Nazis essentially, and they are doing sinister things with uranium. Or again, it's the MacGuffin. It doesn't matter what they're doing.
some sort of smuggling thing, which is why they're in the wine bottles.
Yes, and they've got secret scientists that are doing something. Sounds bad, uranium, sure. But she is having to spy on him, but eventually, even though she does recover some usable information, she ends up deeper and deeper. She has to actually marry him, and it's, she's having to tiptoe around his mother, who's suspicious, and she discovers that they have killed other people. But eventually, Claude Rains realizes, without telling her that he realizes, that she must be a spy. And so he and his mother decide that the only way that he gets out of this alive is if she dies of illness. Because otherwise, the dangerous people he works for will say, "You married a spy, you have to die." And so he and his mother conspire to poison her to death. And so the dilemma becomes, how does she escape this when she is already so ill from the poison that she's essentially helpless? And she has essentially, from her understanding, is she has no reason to believe that anyone will come to save her, because her last communication with Cary Grant was essentially like, "All right, you're leaving, I guess. Whatever, fine. I don't care." Even though, she obviously does really care deeply. But then he uh, recognizes, because he does pay more attention to her than he claimed, that she must have been ill, and comes to the conclusion she needs rescuing, and totally breaks all the cover, just marches into the house and blackmails Claude Rains by saying, "I'm taking her with me, and if you want to stop me, you're going to have to explain why one American agent is taking another American agent out of your house." And he realizes he's trapped, so they leave together, and then at the last second, the whole story, the cover story for the Nazis is, "We're all taking her to the hospital." But then at the last second, Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman lock the door, so Claude Rains can't get in the car, and they drive away, and he has no way to explain why that happened to the Nazis. So, thus, the end of the movie. Um, I really love this movie. What were your? I've talked a lot about it. What were your feelings rewatching it?
No, it's a very, very good movie, and it's. I was glad to rewatch it in this context and kind of look at it again, not with the direct idea of like, are we going to replace it on the list, but looking at it as in relation to this list, because I never really thought about it like that. It's always just been a good Hitchcock. I've never said, is
Mm-hmm.
it better or worse than other Hitchcocks? I've always liked it.
Mm-hmm.
But even now, after having seen it as many times as I have, and knowing there's still just this indelible memory of the wine
Mm-hmm.
cellar giveaway secrets like
It's
that.
an intense scene.
Yes, and I'm always so pleasantly surprised by how good and interesting the rest of it is, which I know is what you are leaning into, but it just whatever for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't, after I rewatch it, it doesn't replicate the deeper part of my brain that remembers it. I just don't ever think about that until I rewatch it again.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was really fun to rewatch, and it is. I mean, the performances are so good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Claude Rains, I know you didn't intend to do this, but like the way that you have to describe the story almost does his character a disservice, because he plays it with so much more conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Like he is the bad guy and he's doing these bad things, but he doesn't, and it's not so overt that he feels
Mm-hmm.
trapped or that he feel like, but it's just something that he plays
Yeah.
where he does genuinely care about her. He doesn't like that he's doing this, but he never said they never say that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just all in his face and his expressions and his
Yeah.
body mannerisms that like you almost feel like he's about to redeem himself when he helps them escape, that it's not truly just a blackmail thing.
Well, he wants out too. He's been stuck with these guys for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's this conflict of like, I don't, this is just what I got myself into. I don't really want to
Mm-hmm.
do it, but now I'm too far down it. And like, but none of that is spoken. I mean, there's little hints at it, obviously, but the bulk of it is all done through his performance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Mm-hmm.
just really, really good to watch.
Yeah. It's actually such a like this cathartic moment of black humor the way that Cary Grant just suddenly locks him out of the car because he didn't
Yes.
have to do it. It's an incredibly petty thing to do, frankly, because his government handlers would probably actually say, "Oh no, hell yeah, bring him in. If he's willing to work with
Yeah.
us, even better."
Yeah.
But
Or
Cary
they
Grant
wouldn't let him
doesn't
go
want
back.
that because he's jealous of him.
Right. And yeah, and all the way that they play the jealousies and the way they play off of each other,
Mm-hmm.
and they, all of that is never outwardly stated. I mean, there's again, there's little conversations where he talks to his mom, like
Mm-hmm.
Claude Rains talked to his mom and says stuff, but like Cary Grant's side of it, he never, there's never really a scene where he expresses what he's feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It's all done in how he relates to Ingrid Bergman, the choices that he makes, like how he kind of rebuffs her at times. Like you feel the jealous tension,
Mm-hmm.
but he never says it. And same thing with her. Like everything that she outwardly says is like, "Oh, well, you must have tricked me into liking you so that I would do this job for you." And oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, you don't care that I'm marrying him. Oh, and
Yeah.
and really, she's like in love with him. It's
Well, yeah, they're all kind of trapped, right? Because Claude Rains obviously, like, he's done some bad stuff, no question about it. He did business deals he shouldn't have with bad people. But once he did that, it became dangerous to try to stop doing it, and he didn't ever have the moral courage to make that move. But it meant that he just kept in getting deeper and deeper in with these bad people. And we get the impression that, like, he's not playing the role as a Nazi, but he's certainly playing the role as someone who paid once into the mafia protection racket and now has to do what they say. That's the kind of position he seems to be in, although it's kind of hinted at that, like, he maybe had more direct involvement previously, but there's a sympathetic side to the character for sure.
right.
And then in the meantime, Ingrid Bergman is in this position where she is essentially being told, for the good of the country, for national security, for the good old US of A, you have to go do this thing that seems really off putting and inappropriate for a country to ask a person to do. Pretend to love someone who you actually find morally repulsive and go as far as to sleep with and marry him for maybe getting useful information, maybe. Also, you'll be in physical danger for certain if you're not a good enough liar. But it's okay because we know you're a liar already anyway. And you sleep with lots of guys, so this should be easy for you. And that's
Right.
the way the government's treating her here at the same time that they're saying, come on, for the good of the country, mom and apple pie and baseball. And they don't say it like that, but at the same time, it's, it's just one of those things where, like, for all that she is actually kind of on their side in the sense of being opposed to the Nazis, they're not making a strong case for America being the moral in the moral high ground, you know. Um, and then in the meantime, you have Cary Grant's character who works for them, but wasn't told what the deal was. He was told, "Go get her, bring her to Rio. We've got a job in mind for her." And he also didn't realize that he would find her much more compelling and interesting than he thought. Like, he thought initially what he was told by his employers, which was, her dad was a bad guy. She seems to not like that, but now she just drinks all the time and has sex with lots of people. And so she's the exact sort of person that we need to do a job like this. And, like, once he hears that, he's like, she is more than that. All he can do, because he works for them, right? And so he tries to say, oh, well, I actually think you don't have the right person. I don't think she's the person that you need for this. I don't think we should make her do it. I don't think she'll want to do it. But he's really saying that because he kind of doesn't want her to do it. He wants her to be the person who will say no to this job because it's kind of awful. But at the same time, he won't say to her, I want you to say no because I love you. And in the meantime, she's saying, I love you, so if you're asking me to do this, I will. Even though what she wants is for him to say that. So neither of them are willing to say what they actually want. And so they end up in the situation that is pain for both of them. It's this amazing little rock paper scissors of emotional entanglement.
Yeah, and and for me, like just to be just honest about where some of the weaker parts of the movie, I do feel like the setup of all of it is one of the weaker parts of the movie. Like how quickly he falls in love with her,
Hmm.
like the idea behind this operation. Like it feels kind of like you just sort of accept that this is what they're doing.
Yeah.
But they do but it reminds me of how good the performances are. Is that by the time you're an hour into the movie or whatever, you don't care anymore. Like you totally believe all of the things that have been set up because of how good they relate to each other. Like there was a longer setup, like there was a more detailed setup.
Yeah.
You know,
I
so
yeah, I tend to agree. I feel like the three leads are amazing, outstanding, incredible, people who are in lots of amazing movies. The not all of the bit players are as good. A lot of the other government agents, for example, just play very much like 1940s stock types. You know,
right.
um, and so I'll agree that I think that it's a stylistic thing that we've kind of moved past, but like movies of the era, like the long, slow developing romance is not common in movies of this era.
Yeah.
I think, so I'm not disagreeing that I feel like I agree that part is happens really fast. Mostly what happens is he shows up at a party and they kind of have an instant infatuation with each other. She drives him drunk around like a forest or something. It's a little unclear where they are exactly. Um, and because they have one really, really good night, essentially, that
Right.
is. Well, it's interesting because I think it's the night and it's the morning because she's driving drunk and they get pulled over. And he gets the cop to go away by revealing that he's a federal agent. And although she has been, she's being kind of performatively belligerent to him, right? In that whole sequence. But then when she realizes he's a cop, she's been being hounded by journalists and police and so on because of her father. And so when she realizes he's a cop, she's just furious. But she's so drunk, okay. It's also a sign of the times that it is treated as a heroic action that he essentially knocks her unconscious in order to stop her from driving drunk.
Yeah. There's a lot of weird sort of period type stuff in this opening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, he literally punches her in the face and knocks her unconscious in order to get her to not drive drunk off into the dark forest because he wants to try to take her home and like take her home, not to like take advantage of her, but like get her home safely and put her in
Right.
bed, which is what he does. Um, but so that bit doesn't doesn't play today like I think it did in 1946. Because the movie certainly treats that as him doing the right thing, stopping her from doing something stupid and dangerous. I don't know that it's supposed to be like a heroic thing as much as like it doesn't play quite the same way. But in any event, it's in the next morning when she realizes like how much of an advantage he could have taken of her but didn't, right? And there's that whole bit because like there's the extremely silly bit early on before they go on the drive where she's wearing a top with a bare midriff, which I think probably it was moderately scandalous in 1946, and they're going out for a drive, and he, because they're both kind of drunk, takes this scarf and wraps it around the bare part of her waist because she'll get cold. And it's very silly. But then when she wakes up, she still has the scarf around her waist. And it's revealed later that she kept the scarf because it meant something to her now. This recognition of like, oh, I this guy that I thought that I was really connecting with, turns out he was only following me because he's a cop. But then, except for the part where he knocked me unconscious, he treated me really nice and he brought me home and he took care of me and had hangover medicine ready for me when I woke up and all of these things, and so treated me nicer than he had to and nicer than she expected, and so that's kind of where that comes. But it's true. It's like that all happens like in the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, and then the next scene that happens is like a week later, and she's not, well, she calls herself a week sober, but she's drinking with him, but she only has one or however many, like she stops,
Yeah.
but he like essentially like bullies her in to keep drinking and like tells her she'll never
Yeah.
change. Like
Well,
it's just a
no.
weird
So
opening.
I'll defend that because I
Okay.
believe that that is absolutely part of their whole dynamic that's being established there. Is essentially because he because she thinks he sees her as a drunken floozy, she wants to show him she can be better than that, and so she quits drinking.
And
But
he's trying to,
because, hmm? Well, and
and
so
he's
he's
that, yeah.
actually, yeah, so he's actually kind of impressed at the same time that he knows that if she is actually better than a drunken floozy, he would be kind of shitty to make her do this job. And so for that reason, he does kind of like, and there's a little bit of a Madonna whore thing in the sense of like he kind of likes both aspects of it, right? Like he likes a little bit the idea that she who likes alcohol obviously would quit drinking for him. But does he really want her to quit drinking? Is that what he wants? Maybe not. But he is not very nice about it, and he basically teases her of like, "Oh boy, a week sober, whatever."
Yeah, it's like
And
you went back to the whole past.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so she feels chastened for this opening gambit of like, "Hey, I could be better," and then he kind of acts like, "Oh, that's stupid." And she's like, "Oh, well, okay, I guess I'll have a drink anyway then, huh? Because that's what you want. That's what you want me to be." And so they're
Yeah.
both kind of not saying what they really want. They're just doing passive aggressive things at each other.
So I accept your defense of that scene for sure. It still doesn't take what I still think is one of the weaker parts of it, at that in
Yeah.
that is what makes them fall in love with each other.
I
Like I
well,
still think that sort of like tacitly just has to
yeah,
be understood,
sure.
and I do still believe that their interactions throughout the rest of the film are what make us feel like they're in love. But you've made the earlier defense of that the era of movie does not have to have this convincing love affair, especially when it's not actually the point of the movie. We just have to
Yeah.
agree that they are in love,
Well,
right?
the other thing that I would certainly say, and this is not like a movie has to work, right? Like, and so just because it's trying to do something doesn't automatically make it successful. But I think it's also like even as I defend those parts, I'm not defending it as saying it's actually this great healthy romantic relationship because it's definitely not. Um, I believe that they do genuinely care for one another, but it's a messed up dynamic that they're in due to all of these external circumstances. Could it have actually been a more healthy relationship? Maybe, but there was no way it was going to be with all of these other forces squashing it into a bizarre shape.
Right. And I want to be clear when I say that to me it's like the weaker part of the movie. It's not that I feel like this is a weak movie.
Mm,
It's
yeah.
more to just have a
Yeah, no,
discussion about.
well, I'll certainly also agree that the movie doesn't really kick into gear until they're starting to target Claude Rains and get her in with him. Like that's when the movie really starts clicking, I
Yeah.
think. Um, and I agree too that like even though I think it is intentional that all of the other federal agents are kind of like glib and uncaring about the danger and emotional trauma that is being inflicted on her. Um, like, I think that's intentional, but it also can play as a little bit just like what are they even doing here? Like they feel like they're half-assing their jobs. Um, because Cary Grant's character actually cares about it, and all of the other agents feel like they've got 100 fish on a string, and this is one of them. And hey, maybe this won't work out, and if it does, and if she gets killed, then we'll do something else instead, and that's fine. That's kind of how they act about it. They don't act like this is actually a life and death thing that we've got to find out what this guy's doing. They act like they've been assigned to find out information by their boss, and this is just one of the many ways they're trying. And but they're not especially invested in it either way.
You gonna go?
Yeah. But as far as like iconography and stuff go, like you mentioned the wine cellar, and certainly like the wine bottles with the uranium ore in it as kind of a MacGuffin. But like, let's talk a little bit about the key because I have the poster on our screen right now, and they've got an outline of a key on there because of course the key is prominent in the plot because the wine cellar, it becomes obvious to her that the wine cellar must be where something secret is happening because it's the only room they don't give her keys for, even once she marries him. And it just seems weird. Like, why would I get keys for everything except the wine cellar of all places? And so eventually they tell her, okay, you got to try to get that key. Even though she would have very little explanation for why. And so they try to make it somewhat easier on her by saying, well, if you can get us the key, like there'll be a big party and Cary Grant can come to the party as a guest. And if you can get him the key, then he can actually be the one to go check the wine cellar. So you don't have to do that part. And that's supposed to be easier for her, right? But the problem is, if you don't have a copy of the key, when you have it, the other person who expects to have it doesn't have it. And so there's the whole tension of, she manages to take the key, and there's a whole bit where she has taken it and she has it in her hand, and Claude Rains is like, "Oh, darling, coming," and like he's like hugging her, and she's having to hug him with the key in one hand, and
Yeah.
he's trying to kiss her hands, and she's like, "Oh yeah, it's great." Turns it into a hug, and like and that awkwardness. And then there's that incredible shot too from the balcony, where it's giving us a little bit of geography of the house, because we're in the balcony where Claude Rains currently is, looking down on the dance floor at her and kind of pointing generally in the direction where the wine cellar is. And we zoom down all the way in from the balcony all the way down to an extreme close up of her hand where we reveal that she's holding the key. And it's just a very cool shot. You know,
Which is totally unexpected from a Hitchcock movie. So
it's true that that's not generally his. Well, I mean, Psycho is all about
I
a
was
lot.
being sarcastic,
Oh,
but
okay, okay.
there are a number of his movies that
Yeah,
have
okay.
very, very clever. Yeah.
I was going to
Uh,
say I might have to push back on that one.
that was sarcasm.
Hmm.
So.
Yeah. So in any case, though, the key is how ultimately Claude Rains figures out what must be happening, because first of all, when Cary Grant is trying to go and investigate the wine cellar, she kind of follows him there, sort of to try to. I think what it is that she thinks that the wine steward is going to request the key to go get more wine while Cary Grant is down there, and so she's trying to go warn him. I think is why she's there. But that while she's there, the two of them together discover the secret of this bottle by accidentally breaking one. Whoops. So the tension of how do we hide this? Oh my God, Claude Rains is coming. Now that he's here, we can't get away. So he's found the two of us together in this secret place. What do we do? And having to cover that, and it's all very intense. But the thing is, as suspicious as it is that they were in that general area, and as much as they try to red flag that whole thing by pretending that he tried to kiss her and she rebuffed him, to make Claude Rains angry about a different thing. Not that they're there, but that the kiss instead. But so that was already suspicious. But then that night, he realizes that he doesn't have the key, and then the next day, it's back. So it wasn't just that it was stolen, it was that somebody also put it back. And that's when he knows it has to be her, because who else could it have been at that point? And so, certainly that key is pretty meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, to my point, this
Mm-hmm.
this the MacGuffin part of it is so well done.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep. So I guess to put it back in context with our overall theme, as we kind of mentioned, Ingrid Bergman and Claude Rains, for that matter, are both in Casablanca. We're probably not gonna, I think they're both incredible in this movie, but they're also incredible in Casablanca. It's a pretty hard sell to try to say that we think this is anything, almost anything would be better than the most iconic, one of the most iconic films of all time. Um, but let's talk. And so Cary Grant's in a number of other movies on the list, right? Obviously, he's. Let's see. I'm pulling look up the list right now. He's in Bringing Up Baby. Um, what else is he in? I'm
North
floundering
by
at the moment.
Northwest.
Hmm.
North by Northwest, isn't
Yes.
he?
Oh, yes. Yes. North by Northwest. Um, and I feel like there was another one. I kind of I prepared this informally, and then I um, didn't actually have everything ready. But and for that matter, then also for Hitchcock, we have Vertigo, Psycho, North by Northwest, and Rear Window, right? Yeah, are all on the list. So
Yep.
Hitchcock has four movies, and I think, as I mentioned, every time we talked about one of them, that like as much as those are four good movies, like I mean, I like Notorious more than all four of those personally.
I I like it better than Vertigo for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Vertigo does different things though. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Vertigo sort of sets movie making into a different direction, like making that kind of stuff like okay, like
Mm-hmm.
sort of the weird sort of surrealism almost.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it better than North by Northwest. Um, I like it on par with Rear Window.
Mm-hmm.
But Rear Window, I don't know if you've watched the new Amy Adams Netflix
Mm-mm.
movie, but it's essentially like a modernized female lead version of Rear Window. I mean, it has some differences that more than just being modernized, but
Mm-hmm.
modernized with what that type of plot needs anymore. Um, so it's still having, you know, but to your point, so is this one. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this one is having effects on cartoons and like it's not. it's animated, not a
Yeah.
cartoon. I
I mean,
should
it's
dis.
still a cartoon. I don't know. Depends on how you want to define cartoon. I don't think cartoon requires hand drawn, but
Yeah, but I'm not trying to dismiss
yeah,
the Clone Wars thing as just like
sure.
a cartoon, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a little bit more thematic than like SpongeBob.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's true. Um, but yeah, so like I feel like if I were gonna swap it out, I think I would. I mean, I like North by Northwest, but not as much as you did. I feel like if I were gonna swap out a Hitchcock, it would be either that one or Rear Window. I mean, I like Rear Window a lot, but I feel like of the four Hitchcock movies, I feel like that's the one that other movies do that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
yeah, and I think where I'm feeling is a lot of other movies that do that kind of thing because of Rear Window. That's where I give it a
Yeah.
little bit of credit for that.
Mm-hmm. But I also, I mean, I think that like the bare bones of that plot, not to diminish it at all, are pretty simple, right? Like, you know, you know, nosy neighbor thinks someone committed a murder. You know, I mean, you could tell that a thousand different ways. It's because it's a very, like, to its credit, it's sort of a very simple, easy, meaty plot. You know, like it's. I'm not. I'm trying to say
No,
this in a good
what
way.
you're
You know what I
saying
mean?
is what I understand exactly what you're saying without you having to even like go too much further,
Mm-hmm.
and I get that sentiment. And I'm not trying to argue that you need to agree with my feeling, but that same reason that I understand why you're kind of like is part of why I like it so much is
Yeah.
because it does something that is a simple idea that is replicated in a million different ways,
Mm-hmm.
but it's even if it wasn't seminal, like it kind of
Well,
is in the mainstream.
see, that's the thing though, is that I just feel a little bit. It feels a little bit more like if you have an expert chef who makes all sorts of really fancy meals, and then sometimes he also just makes a hamburger. And he makes the hamburger really well, but other people also make hamburgers, whereas this chef also, his specialties are things that no one else does.
It's fair.
And so it doesn't mean the hamburger's not good, but there's lots of people who can make hamburgers. And again, it is only in the context of talking about the best movies of all time, anyway, right? Because Rear Window is a hell of a hamburger. But I feel like Notorious is a movie that I can't point to a half dozen other movies that are just like it. You know?
Yeah, and this is where I get sort of like in this weird like torn thing because on the one hand, I just purely enjoy North by Northwest more than
Oh
this
yeah,
movie.
and that's fair. Yeah, obviously we're always gonna have.
Right. On the other hand, like so if I'm saying that's why I don't replace it with North by Northwest,
Mm-hmm.
but I like this movie way better than I like Vertigo, so then I should be replacing that.
Yeah.
And then you come into oh well, but Vertigo does this, and this that's so
Yeah.
important, and it's like oh, I don't really know. I mean, this is a complicated discussion.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, it's I like I think Vertigo does a lot of interesting things, but I don't think all of it lands as effectively as this one does lands for me. So that's why I would probably swap it. But I also, it's funny because we talk the way we were just talking about Rear Window. I feel like my other favorite Hitchcock movie is Strangers on a Train, and that is much more in the hamburger vein, right? Like, it's not sophisticated. It's telling a story that might as well have been on like Alfred Hitchcock Presents or something. It's really just kind of like it's sort of a cool what if crime story sort of thing. Like, what if you got, you know, you met someone who gave you the silly idea about switching murders, and you thought it was all a joke until they actually did it. Oh, it seems like almost like a pulp novel cover, right? And it is. That is exactly what it is. And it's just that he made it really, really well. And so, like, that's why I think once when I was kind of waffling over which of those two, it's like, yeah, okay. I think if we're talking about a movie to go on the list, that one, even though I like it for pure entertainment value, I think Notorious is sort of a better film.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I think we don't have to actually swap anything, but I think that's kind of probably covers kind of our discussion of it. I mean, because certainly if we swapped out Rear Window, like what are we losing from the list, right? Nothing really, because we have Jimmy Stewart as the lead in that, but he's also certainly well represented on the list elsewhere, right? Um, we have other thrillers on the list. You know, uh, I don't know. So I guess if you had to pick one, which Hitchcock do you switch it out for? We kind of talked
I mean,
through a couple.
I'm gonna do it for Vertigo just
Mm-hmm.
out of what I like better. I'm
Fair.
just gonna
Yeah.
use that so I don't have to pontificate over which one has more of an
Mm-hmm.
impact on this, and this.
Yeah.
Like I like this movie better. So
Yeah. I'm just actually looking at our list, and it's certainly true that Vertigo is the lowest you had on the list of the Hitchcock movies.
yeah, I think about it in the idea of like if somebody said right now after we're done talking, regardless of whether I watched this recently or not,
Mm-hmm.
and said, "Hey, do you want to watch either Notorious or Vertigo?" I'm gonna watch Notorious.
Mm-hmm.
If you said you want to watch Notorious or North by Northwest, I watch North by Northwest. If you say you want to watch Notorious or Rear Window, right now I'd probably say Rear Window just
Hmm.
because I can then liken it to things that are happening now and say, hey, you remember that Netflix movie that was #1 in the
Mm-hmm.
nation 3 weeks ago? This is what created all of that. Look how cool this was back then. So just timeliness wise, that I choose Vertigo.
Sure. All right. So I think that was a fun discussion of a movie that I enjoy. So let's go ahead and move along to The Departed. Do you want, since this was your suggestion, would you like to introduce and talk about it?
Yeah, this movie is also a very character driven one. So we have, without like trying to go through the whole timeline of the movie, what we end up with is a number of people it all takes place in Boston and the mob scene in Boston, the mob versus police scene in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a number of different characters in the movie who are infiltrating the opposition. So on
Mm-hmm.
the Leonardo DiCaprio side, you have somebody who grew up in South Boston or part of the time because he had divorced parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was able to kind of take on two different personalities of either both this like lower class versus middle class. And he goes into the police academy. So they recruit him to actually infiltrate the mob because he can lean on those family connections and that identity to gain their trust.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Matt Damon, who is identified as very young as somebody who is friendly to the mob families, but has the intelligence and the polish to make it through to the police academy. And so he goes through and becomes a detective and works his way into where he is the detective on the unit that is investigating the mob that he is actually paid and friendly to. And then Jack Nicholson is the head of the mob, which it becomes revealed later is also an FBI informant, but also is revealed later that it's not because of any kind of long-standing belief. He's just a complete opportunist, and the FBI gave him an extra opportunity, and so he just plays both sides because whatever works for him.
Mm-hmm.
And you have these three people with these dichotomies of who they're trying to pretend to be and who they're actually spending their time with,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all sort of investigating and working with each other because Leonardo DiCaprio is trying to gain Jack Nicholson's trust, and So there's a whole back and forth between how do I prove that I'm trustworthy, and then how do you prove to me that you're trustworthy, that Jack Nicholson puts on him.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Damon sort of has this, engendered trust into the police academy because he graduated there, but they are looking for the mole. And so he's having to find a way to navigate how they're trying to investigate the mole, and how does he kind of keep himself shielded from that.
Mm-hmm.
And all these complexities are then you add in, a very strong female character who is the police psychologist, who has affection for both Matt Damon,
Mm-hmm.
and Leonardo DiCaprio, who is also was her patient, and so there's some complexities there.
Mm-hmm.
She also shouldn't be seeing police officers in general, so there's some complexities with Matt Damon, and so she's torn just between should I even be involved with either of them, and then kind of the passion she feels for Leonardo DiCaprio's character versus the more it it's not even this dispassionate, but like it's more of like, well, this is a more regular relationship that she ends up in with Matt Damon.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this is leading, and there's MacGuffins in this movie too, between Chinese um, microchips that they're trading out and all this type of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And the whole movie is just very much a cat and mouse versus cat versus mouse, cat,
Yeah.
mouse, like and the intricacies of how they do it. And so, yeah, I say this is a very character driven movie. Obviously, the plot is very well written,
Mm-hmm.
to play all these guys off of each other. There are some weaknesses, and it's like,
Well,
well,
what I was going to say is that I would describe it as a plot-driven movie because it is absolutely comes. I cannot imagine this movie was written in any way other than, wouldn't it be cool if you had an undercover agent trying to get into the mob at the same time that the mob has a mole in the police department, and wouldn't it be cool if they all bounce around with each other? Now, that's not to say they didn't write great characters and cast good actors, but I would call that a plot-driven story.
so the reason I say it's a character driven story is that there are some plot points where it gets a little weak as to whether this would actually work with some of the
Yeah.
stuff with like, oh well, I'm gonna,
Well.
fake, I'm gonna leave without giving you my bank account information, even though that's what you wanted. That actually makes me look more like a sus, like all some of that stuff, so there's a little bit of a tenuous thread to it, but
Mm-hmm.
you let it go because of how good their performances are.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I say it's a character driven movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you take to your point, the general plot setup is amazing, like that part of the writing, but then when it gets into some of the nitty gritty, it's a little like, you know.
Yeah.
And then there's two past those four. There's still two main secondary characters who are amazing, which is Martin Sheen and Mark Wahlberg,
Mm-hmm.
and even Alec Baldwin to some extent. But Martin Sheen is the police captain who's the only one who knows, well, the only one with Mark Wahlberg who knows Leonardo DiCaprio's true identity.
Mm-hmm.
They're handling him. Also has a long term, antagonistic relationship with Jack Nicholson. They're sort of like the elder statesman of this police
Yeah.
versus mob thing. And then Mark Wahlberg is this like super idealistic, like gung ho, like I'm going to do the right thing and I don't give a fuck what anybody thinks. Like
Mm-hmm.
just that's you have to use that language because that's kind of how he talks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like
Um,
that's his kind of his whole gimmick is that he is just needlessly vulgar and antagonistic in every possible interaction.
right. Because not because he's partly like that, but partly he uses that tactic to like cut to the chase of like, this is what I want to get done. Like
Mm-hmm.
I am purely focused on getting the right thing done. And so you have lots and lots. I mean, we couldn't go through every plot point here,
Mm.
but there are many of them that ultimately succumb to, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio is goes to meet Martin Sheen, but they found out, but Matt Damon at this point has figured out, how to tail. He's basically tricked the police into tailing Martin Sheen because he said he could be the mole.
Mm-hmm.
And so now he has police intelligence that lead him to where Martin Sheen is, and then so they know where.
I actually really like that plot point, just partly because I think it feels both funny and probably true to life that the reaction of everybody else to Matt Damon saying, "Yeah, yeah, it might be Martin Sheen. He might be the mole. Let's all tail him." And everyone's like, "What? All right." But then they do it, and it's like, yeah, okay, I believe that that's exactly how it would go. Is that people would think that seems stupid, but I guess I'll do it. Just because nobody actually is invested in anything. That's not true. That's not what I mean to say. But it's more just like all of the side characters are kind of just following orders because that's kind of how both the mob and the police work.
Yep. And then it's hard to even describe how the ending happens. So anyway, when they tail Martin Sheen, he ends up getting killed and thrown off of a building, which is
Mm-hmm.
a very impactful scene because Leonardo DiCaprio is trying to get the hell out of there because he
Yeah.
doesn't want the bad guys, the mob, to see him there.
Mm-hmm.
And in his running, the body falls and lands like right in front of him.
Yeah.
And then the mob pulls up and said, "Where have you been?" And
Yeah.
and it turns out that they had given him the wrong
Yeah.
building, and
I
so in
think
fact,
that,
the
like
right
that's
place. Yeah.
yeah, like that's it's tense, but that's another I think example of a plot point that sort of breaks immersion a little bit because it's very contrived. Not that bit that they gave him the wrong address and that whole thing because I feel like that feels like authentic people scrambling to figure out what to do and that sort of thing. But the whole bit where the guy who was shot is the one that he knows he gave Leonardo DiCaprio the wrong address and he tells him that and then immediately dies.
Yes.
And I'm
This
like,
is what I'm
what?
saying about.
What? He didn't tell anybody else. He tells just the one person that he's actually suspicious of and then immediately dies. It's like, all right, well, I guess that was a really important thing to have happen. I mean,
Which,
it's kind of exciting, but it does feel very contrived, not like a real thing.
but it does lead to maybe one of the most confusing scenes in the movie that also is like this big aha about how hard these guys are leaning into this cat and mouse game.
Hmm.
In that the next scene of the movie is a news report that's saying the guy who died was actually a police officer.
Hmm.
And you're like, wait, so there were two undercover guys?
Yeah,
Oh, no, they're saying he was a police officer, so they think they found the guy that they were looking for. Like, oh,
yeah,
so much like that whole part. That so you almost forgive it at that point because it's like that delivery is so good when it finally like clicks in your
yeah.
head what happened. Yeah.
Well, and I've watched this movie 3 times, including this most recent one, and I have that same reaction every time where I've forgotten that detail, and then I have that same thing like, wait, I don't remember that. Wait, is another agent? I don't know. Like, oh, yeah. Yeah. So I agree. I think that part works neat. Is
Which they throw another layer onto that later in the movie in the actual final ending where Matt Damon decides to use Martin Sheen's phone now that he's dead and he has possession of it
hmm
to call Leonardo DiCaprio and bring him in. And then they have a heated exchange, and Leonardo DiCaprio realizes who he is and decides to arrest him and is bringing him down to arrest him and then is shot by ostensibly another police officer in the elevator who then tells Matt Damon,
yeah,
"Oh, you thought you were the only
yeah,
mole the mob had?"
yeah.
And then Matt Damon shoots him and sets up this crime scene where it
hmm
looks like what happened, only to then, it all,
I
which a
I
whole other part with like Leonardo DiCaprio like gets this finally does actually get a police funeral. Like he does tell them that he was the police officer, even though nobody knew anymore. And so he gets the whole 21 gun salute, all the thing that he was like sort of joking about earlier.
hmm
He does receive that in the end. And then Matt Damon returns to his house, and Mark Wahlberg has figured out what is happening. And because he's going to make it right. He just kills Matt Damon in a way that we're clear that he has left no evidence that it will ever be tracked to him and
Yeah.
then disappear. Yeah. So just like, whoa. You know?
Yeah, I do like just thinking about Matt Damon's state of mind when this guy shoots Leonardo DiCaprio and then explains, "Oh yeah, I'm actually another mole that you didn't know about because Jack Nicholson didn't tell you that either, and also he was going to turn both of us in." And I can just imagine Matt Damon saying, "I am so fucking glad I shot that guy because what an asshole that guy turned out to be."
Yeah.
I can't believe I devoted my life to him for so long.
Yeah.
Um, I will say though that I I don't like the ending of this movie. I think it's interesting, but not emotionally satisfying. Um, Especially like, sure, it's shocking and maybe you could even say realistic. I guess the idea that one of your main characters just gets killed suddenly, the way that Leonardo DiCaprio gets, shot from someone who was off screen until that very moment. Like just the elevator door opens, kablam, he's dead, and like I mean, I get that that's something that could happen in real life. People do get killed suddenly. It certainly has shock value, but it leaves me feeling like that was not a satisfying story for that character. That's not I'm not fulfilled by that ending. And then I like that Matt Damon doesn't just get away with it, but it just feels all kind of messy in a way that that's the thing is that I like a lot of stuff about this movie, and I think a lot of the pieces of how they're all doing this game of cat and mouse with each other, I think a lot of that is very cool, but I do feel like a lot of it at the end just feels like, okay, well, we got to clear the board, so yeah, now everyone's dead. The end. That's
So yeah, and I'm not gonna say that you shouldn't. I feel like you're supposed to feel that way. It's just whether or not that like you take enjoyment out of like not that I take enjoyment out of
mm,
Leonardo DiCaprio getting killed suddenly, but like of the idea of like, wow, that's what that was supposed to make me feel like, and that's uncomfortable.
yeah,
You know? And I mean, the name of the movie is The Departed,
yeah,
which is part of the the Irish Catholic prayer to the dead.
mm-hmm.
You know, do their wakes and stuff like that. Um, so the idea that everybody dies at the end, I feel like was sort of baked in.
Yeah, well, and I don't even necessarily. That's not the problem as much as it doesn't feel like it happened in a narratively fulfilling way. Now, maybe that's the intent, but that
I feel like
doesn't
it
make
is
me
the
enjoy
intent.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's not supposed to be fulfilling. Like you're not supposed to be. You're supposed to feel shock at Leonardo DiCaprio dying because like you're building to this crescendo. I mean, like he's a talented filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that like you thought he was down and out, like after Martin Sheen died and he had everything and Matt Damon had the upper hand, like you think Leonardo DiCaprio, who is our hero ostensibly,
Mm-hmm.
is down and out, and then he's got a way to get his redemption. Like he got the upper hand on Matt Damon.
Mm-hmm.
He finally did it, and then it's taken from him.
Yeah.
And then everything after that is just sort of like you're kind of in this like freewheeling space of like
Mm-hmm.
what just happened, like what am I doing, and then you don't even really feel fulfilled that Matt Damon got his. You're just kind of like,
Yeah.
well, good.
Well, yeah, but like that's the thing is that I feel like the movie kind of wants to have its cake and eat it too, so to speak, in the sense that like okay, The Departed. Do you Are you trying to tell us a fun little clockwork premise of a crime story, or are you trying to be gritty and real about the way things really go down and organized crime and all of that sort of thing? Because those two are not the same movie, and I feel like this movie is trying to do both of those things, and they don't mesh. They don't line up perfectly at the seams. And it's some of those points that we're talking about where something like there are moments where it clearly is supposed to feel like this is real, this is how things actually go, the good guy doesn't always win, sometimes people just get killed suddenly. But then there's other places where it's very obvious that there is a invisible hand at work lining things up just so that the plot can happen.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and it's one of the interesting things about this movie, and part of why I suggested it is that I I like going for that ride.
Mm-hmm.
I like feeling like, okay, this part's a little contrived, and I'm going to kind of lean into it. To oh shit, what just happened? Like
Mm-hmm.
oh, like there's just something for me that this movie delivers on that sort of it's clever and intricate, and these characters are maneuvering through this whole thing, but then there's this pop
Mm-hmm.
pop pop in different places, not just the end. There are a couple of times where you just kind of get like, wait, what, and I sort of like not, and maybe it's, I don't mean this to sound like arrogant, but it's like because I watch so many movies, like there's times that like and you have the same thing. Like we watch some of these movies and we
Mm-hmm.
can kind of see where the end is coming
Yeah.
because we know where the movie is leading us.
Right.
And even though I know the first time I watched this movie, I had no idea where it was going. I
Mm-hmm.
liked the idea that like I really couldn't ever figure out what was going to happen and like how I was going to feel at a certain point. Like it
Yeah.
never, every time it led me down one direction, it like pulled it back,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
that was
I'll
fun for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I do actually I like that about it. That and this I guess comes back to the whole discussion of plot motivated versus character motivated. I think that the whole thing started from a plot premise, but I think it's also true that for the most part, what happens in the movie happens because those characters make the decisions that they do, right? And I think that it does do a good job of having things not feel preordained. Like it does feel kind of excitingly chaotic in a way of you really don't know what could happen, and so there's suspense as a result. I do like that about it, and let me be clear too. I like this movie. I enjoyed rewatching it. I don't dislike it, but it's I think it's only when we're talking about like in context with the greatest movies ever. It's like, but I feel like there's some things that kind of rub me the wrong way a little bit, and in particular, like I said, I feel like I like so much of this movie a lot, and then I feel like the ending just happens, and it doesn't like it doesn't feel like the end of a story. It just feels like they were tired of writing, so they decided everybody dies.
Yeah, and
Like,
I leave with partially the same feeling, right?
mm-hmm.
Like, obviously we get the same ending, but I feel like it's more deliberate than that, and it's the ultimate like we're gonna build up your where you think this is gonna going, and then we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
pull it out even harder than we have before, and it's that part is sort of satisfying. Like, obviously, there's no satisfying end to this movie because which again is why I go back to why this is character driven. The reason why we forgive some of the more contrived parts of the plot, why it is because we absolutely just love the way that these characters are displaying. Like Jack Nicholson is larger than life as this like you know just affluent, I can do anything I want with anybody I want, mob boss. Matt Damon with this, his I'm really smart and I've made it this far, and like almost this like a level of arrogance that isn't really outwardly displayed,
Mm-hmm.
except in like little bits, like little jokes. But like he has this internal arrogance that is
Mm-hmm.
just like so big. And Leonardo DiCaprio, who just is, trying to figure out how to do the right thing, and like he's just our hero, and he got put in this situation, and he because of who he was and because of the skills that he has, and he's had to do things that he's not proud of, but he knows it's for the greater good. But
Mm-hmm.
is he really going to get out of this thing? Like there's just this whole cloud over him, and it just like how that weighs on him, like literally weighs on like how his character is portrayed.
Well,
And
yeah,
it's so much
I,
fun to watch these guys. Yeah.
I think that like what I feel like the ending is going for is, of course, we're supposed to be distraught and shocked and angry and frustrated when Leonardo DiCaprio is killed. I think that's intentional. That's how we're supposed to feel. But I feel like the movie is wanting me to feel better when Matt Damon is killed. Like, good, got him, like that sort of thing, and like that completes the emotional loop. When I don't really feel that way, largely because it wasn't Matt Damon that killed him. Like maybe he would have if he had had the opportunity, but he didn't. It was, frankly, from his perspective, dumb luck.
Yeah.
And
I
and
think so. I agree with that too. I don't feel satisfied when Matt Damon
yeah,
dies either.
but I feel like when I watch that the end of this movie, what I feel is it feels to me like the movie wants me to be satisfied, but I'm not. Now maybe that wasn't the intention. I don't know, but I would feel like I feel like the intention and the execution feels confused to me at the end. But what I will I lost my train of thought there. There was another piece of one other thing that I actually wanted to jump back on, if you don't mind changing the
Of
subject a
course.
little bit, is I'm going to talk more in a minute about things that I do really like in this movie, but I wanted to just kind of jump back to something you said earlier when you described Madeline as a really strong female character, and I'm not sure I agree, but I guess I
Okay.
wanted to hear your take on it. I mean, I don't dislike the actress. It's not that. It's just
So yeah, I mean, I'd like to hear your
okay.
take on it because like
Well,
I felt like she was strong because she has, she's obviously like she's smart, she's capable. She, you look like you're gonna say
well,
something different.
I feel like the one time we see her at work, she is not good at her job and says as much because she lets Leonardo DiCaprio get under her skin and yells at him.
No, that's fair. Okay.
That's the one time we actually see her at work. And then the other times is when she's engaging in inappropriate relationships, where she's sleeping with a police officer when she knows she shouldn't be. And also, she is in a relationship for quite a while until she is given extremely concrete proof that Matt Damon's character is basically a sociopath. So I guess I just
If
sort
you
of
put
feel
it that
like
way.
now
Yeah.
I'm not saying that she reads to me as an unlikely or inhuman person. I feel like she feels like a complex character. I just wouldn't describe her as especially strong. She is she is the girlfriend, is what she is. And the fact that she's a police psychologist is basically just kind of a plot excuse to get her connected to these two guys.
I have no defense of that. When I said strong, I guess I meant a strong performance is what I
And
was saying.
I'll agree with that. Vera Farmiga, I think she does a great job with the
Yep.
role.
But you have made 100% accurate points that I can't refute. So you're right.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Yeah, because I
I was
like the scenes where she gets the tape and learns what Matt Damon has kind of been up to, and I enjoy those scenes, and I also enjoy it because like certainly up till the end, I think in the movie like we're supposed to be on Leonardo DiCaprio's side, right? Because Matt Damon's character is not a good guy. He is like he's a bad guy in a different way than Jack Nicholson is, but he is not just Leonardo DiCaprio's opposite number. He is a messed up dude that is just really good at like fitting in when he wants to. There's a little bit
Yes.
of like American Psycho with him.
Yes.
Um,
So
I
I
I haven't rewatched American Psycho in like forever. I wonder if I should rewatch that. Anyway,
make that one at some point.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, and I think to now that I'm thinking about it, just like your point there, I think I do lean a little bit more into the end of where she actually like stands up for herself,
Hmm.
um, and doesn't let her manipulate her, even though he's so good at manipulating. Like once she
Hmm.
has like hard, but to your point, she has very hardcore evidence that he's a terrible person.
She literally has
So
his
maybe I
voice
shouldn't
on
give,
tape talking to the crime lord about
yeah,
crime.
yeah. So maybe I shouldn't be giving as much credit to that character as I was. And
And she is the police psychologist who's been
yeah,
yeah.
and and
Anyway,
and honestly, like I'll just be real honest here. Like when you watch a movie like this that has like a lot of sort of white male like kind of posturing that you really enjoy, like it's
mm,
almost like you want to believe when you're a white male
yeah.
that there is this other part to it that makes it not just that. You don't just like it because of that. So I mean that's just me being vulnerable and
Well,
honest. That
yeah.
might be a thing.
No,
But
and I think well, it's very much not her story, right? And I so it's like she is allowed, you know, that this is one actual like I think the whole kind of like archetype of the strong female character is a thing now because like stories are allowed to have female characters that are not strong people. That's that's okay. Now it's not ideal when the movie's only female character is not strong. And I don't even want to say this is a flaw in the movie because I don't think she's not a bad character, but she's also someone who like there's lots of other cops in this movie are not good at their jobs. There's lots of the gangsters in this movie that are not good at their jobs, such as it is. It's like that's okay. It's not necessarily a failing of the movie, but I think that it's true that in the movie her character is not as sharp as she thinks she is. Um,
I
and
agree. Yeah, no.
she lets herself get fooled pretty dramatically by a pretty bad guy. But on the other hand, I do actually like the tension that she feels. So what I don't want to like have this be about dumping on the character. I would dump on the character's job qualifications, perhaps. But at the same time, all of the emotional tension of her feeling an attraction to Leonardo DiCaprio, even though everything about him on paper is someone she should not go for. He's a violent person. He's involved in crime. Is like as far as what she knows about him, right? Like, um, and he's potentially dangerous. Also, she is in relationship with someone already, and so all of these reasons why she shouldn't go anywhere near him. But when we know he's actually a good guy at heart, contrasted with Matt Damon, who's not a good guy at heart, but who gives all of the outward presenting details, right? He's the straight laced, top of his class at the academy cop. He's making good money. He lives in a nice place. He can provide for her. All of these things. Although I can't help but think like, is it not a little bit suspicious how nice this place is on his
There
ostensible
there
salary?
is one scene where that well when he's buying it, yeah, where
Well, oh,
the
doesn't he say like he inherited money or something?
no he says I have a cosigner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well, but
but
yeah, but isn't that by itself also suspicious? The follow up question to that is, okay, who is it? Yeah, so we know, and I think certainly as an explanation to the audience, we understand what's happening. But why is that not a little bit more suspicious to to other cops, especially when they're looking for a mole?
Yeah, that would be kind of the thing you would look for.
Yeah,
Would
like
you agree?
who has
There,
money they shouldn't.
yeah, those are the pieces that are a little loose in this movie that
Yeah,
I
I
think and that's why I keep calling it a character-driven
sure,
movie
sure.
because I feel like
Well,
you forgive it
yeah. I mean,
because of the characters.
so
Yeah.
I'm going to declare myself done criticizing the parts of this movie that I think are not as good because I think there is a lot. Okay, one more. Alec Baldwin is wasted. Like I love Alec Baldwin, but what is he even doing in this movie? They give him nothing to do. Like I like him, but they just don't give him any scenes where he actually gets to do anything interesting. He might as well be a no-name actor. You know what I mean? It's like everyone else gets meaty stuff except Alec Baldwin basically just gets to be a slightly different version of his Glengarry Glen Ross character. Only he's a cop.
I mean, when I was doing the intro to the movie, I said, here are the four main
Yeah.
characters, which really was three, and then now that you
Mm-hmm.
pointed out, and the girl is sort of like secondary,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's Mark Wahlberg and Martin Sheen, and then I said,
And I guess Alec
oh
Baldwin.
yeah, I guess Alec Baldwin's in
Yeah.
this too. Yeah,
It's just kind of funny that like obviously this is a huge cast of huge names. Not all the characters are going to be equally impressive, but it does that one just in particular feels a little bit like there must have been a bigger role for that character at some point because why would you cast Alec Baldwin in that role otherwise? You know, unless it was just like, oh well, we want his name on the poster. But in any event, I will say though that like the whole plot premise, I was laughing actually when you were describing the plot because what I was really wanting to say, and I just didn't want to interrupt, is it's Notorious again, but just folded in half over on itself.
that's good.
Yeah. But I like that. I mean, because we've seen so many different stories about the undercover cop infiltrating the mafia. There's lots of those, right? But to have it be a cat and mouse game against their counterpart who's doing the same thing in the opposite direction, that's cool. I don't feel like I've ever seen that in a movie before. I think it's interesting, and I think by and large, well executed with some caveats, but mostly I think that's a cool story that I want to know. I want to hear that cool story. And I think actually, you know, to the extent that I find some of the stuff about the ending unsatisfying, it's partly just because the primary thing that I come to the movie interested in is a cool narrative plot. I'm not coming to the movie because I want to know how it really is on the streets. I'm coming to it like, oh, that's a neat premise. I want to see how that plays out. And most of the movie is very cool, and I like how it plays out. And then it just, like I said, at the end, it just feels like they just swept all the pieces off the board instead of actually writing satisfying narrative conclusions. But that's but I think I only feel so frustrated because for so much of the movie, the suspense of them playing this cat and mouse game, the chess moves and back and forth, and the things that they're trying, and is very cool because you get the whole thing of like, okay, Jack Nicholson thinks one of his guys is a rat, but he knows he has Matt Damon in the force, so he's basically saying, hey, how do I find out which one of my guys is the rat? And he says, well, if you give me their bank account numbers, I can look them up. And so he gets them. He gets them there to give the numbers, and then Leonardo DiCaprio is saying, "Oh God, I can't give him those numbers because then he'll actually find out that I am the rat. So I have to come up with an excuse for why I wouldn't give those numbers." But then also, I'm trying to like set up a thing where I want to trail where that information goes and how it gets back to the police so that I can figure out who the mole in the police is. And like all of that stuff is amazing. And like that envelope with the, where it's such a clever thing of like, oh no, you spelled that wrong. So I'm going to correct it and make it very obvious. Like this is this envelope and not a duplicate. And then that becomes the notorious key, right? Later.
Yep.
Um, and I like all of that stuff. I love that stuff. That part of the movie I am super on board for. And it's such great performances from Leonardo DiCaprio and Matt Damon and Jack Nicholson and Martin Sheen and even Mark Wahlberg, he's very good in a very narrow range of characters.
This
Um,
is one of them. He's
yeah,
so good at this character.
yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's not a character with a lot of range. but within that range, he's good. Um, but yeah, I'm just thinking about him recently, just because I guess there's some new sci-fi movie that came out with him in the lead, and I just read the plot summary, and I'm just like, and they cast Mark Wahlberg like as the guy. So this is the movie that I'm talking about is called Infinite, and so the basic premise is an ordinary guy discovers that he is actually part of some special race of people who are immortal by being repeatedly reincarnated, and he just doesn't remember for some reason. And so it's going to be about sort of an action movie about how all of these different people who live through all these different lifetimes are fighting each other, and he's going to discover that he actually has all these badass skills and everything. And I'm like, and you cast Mark Wahlberg?
I
Okay,
mean, he can work as a guy who has a lot of skills but is oblivious.
I guess, but only for that beginning part. Like, Keanu Reeves in The Matrix does both parts. Like, he does the part where it's like it makes sense that he's out of fish out of water, and then he also does the part where you believe it at the end. No.
Fair.
Anyway, this is not a Mark Wahlberg podcast, I agree though. Even he's good
You
in this movie.
want to make that the next set of movies?
The Mark
Is our
Wahlberg
favorite.
movies. um, Movies where one person who is not good in anything else is inexplicably good in something. um,
Good.
anyway, yeah, but so like I'm all of that cat and mouse stuff is very cool, and I love it. And I think occasionally there's little bits where like we talked about the guy who gives I know it was you, except now I'm about to die without telling anybody else. I'm only saying it so that you can feel stressed, and I think the audience maybe doesn't realize this detail, that they might have noticed that I said the wrong address earlier, but they wouldn't put the connection together of what it means until I said this. But it won't matter anyway because I'm teasing at this point. But like, there's occasionally those little bits, but mostly that just feels like occasionally the screenwriter's finger is just dipping in to keep it from going completely off the rails. To have the rest of it just feel like it's about to go off the rails or could go off the rails at any moment, but never quite does. And I like that roller coaster energy to it
Yeah.
up until at the end where it just crashes.
Yeah, and I've already described. I mean, I'm not going to relitigate the end. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, no, that's fine.
we feel the same but reflect differently
Yeah, no,
on how
that's
to end
that's
it.
fine.
And that's what we're
So,
going to leave.
well,
Yeah.
so let's talk a little bit about like we mentioned some of the details of it earlier. Like obviously Jack Nicholson is in in things. He's in just kind of scanning the list, right? Like Easy Rider, obviously he's in. Um, Trying to think what else on this list he's in. I'm not sure. Oh, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah, that was the main one I was thinking of. I couldn't
Yeah.
picture him, but yeah.
Um, and then Leonardo DiCaprio, obviously, Titanic is the one he's on the list for. I don't think he has anything else on the list.
I couldn't find one when I looked.
No. And then Matt Damon has a small part in Saving Private Ryan, but I'm not sure. I can't remember. I don't think he has anything else. But of course, Scorsese has a bunch, right? Like he has Taxi Driver and Goodfellas and
Raging Bull.
Raging Bull. Raging Bull way high up on the AFI's list. You kept it pretty high. I moved it down a little bit, but so at the same, so like of those various categories, are there some of those where you feel like this ought to sub in for one of those? Not that we're necessarily really switching, but just like, is this a better example of one of those things than the ones on the list?
So I kind of hinted at it at the beginning. I think Leonardo DiCaprio is better in this movie than he is in Titanic.
Mm-hmm.
I think Titanic as a whole does different and more things than this
Mm-hmm.
movie that makes it hard to like replace Titanic, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I would agree. Like, I agree with what you just said. I would also say though that like Titanic is such a different role that it calls for different things. But certainly, as the intensity of the acting and the nuance of the performance is obviously superior in The Departed. But it's also like Titanic is just not the movie where you have those things. It's not the kind of story it's telling,
Right.
right? But yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
Um, I don't. I mean, it's not. Those other Scorsese movies are better for me. I was trying to see
Hmm.
if there was anything. I'm looking at the list right now to see if there's any kind of mob movie that
Well, like Goodfellas is well, we mentioned Goodfellas is Scorsese. I think the
Goodfellas is
only
just
other
like,
mob movies are the Godfather movies.
yeah, and those are just more epic. And Goodfellas is just a tighter. It
Yeah,
the this is a better acted movie than Goodfellas. Not that Goodfellas is a poor acted movie by any means. It's
yeah,
very well acted.
you're right.
Um, but it is undeniably tight, like the script writing,
Yes, I agree.
to a point that this one doesn't have.
Yeah,
You
that
know,
one feels narratively cohesive in that all of the parts feel like they belong together in the same movie in Goodfellas.
yeah, yeah, and there is an even though it's not meant to be as like epic as like The Godfather, like there is sort of the epic theme that runs through the movie of like, but it's almost I think we talked about this at the time. It's like the reverse hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
Like he actually becomes worse as the movie goes along, but like that's part of what makes it interesting
Yeah.
and puts it on a different level than a lot of other movies.
So if we're talking about just thematically and not necessarily direct individuals involved, like one of the other crime movies on the list is like The French Connection.
This movie is so this is a hard one because you go back
Bonnie
to
and
my
Clyde.
what
Bonnie and Clyde.
I think this movie is better than both of those movies. Um, there, the French Connection just it that car chase scene and what it did for making car chases cool
Mm-hmm.
for the rest of eternity. It it's so hard to take that off, but I if I had like so to your point, if we had to make a change, I would put this movie as a crime movie above the French Connection, and I would just make sure the French Connection is something that people always know about
Mm-hmm.
that L train car chase.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I feel like most of the rest of that movie has not aged super well.
Yeah,
Not in a like not in the way we might usually say that, as much as it's just like the other things that it does have been iterated on and done better since. Um,
yeah, and it super leans into late '70s, early '80s New York, which New York doesn't look like that anymore.
hmm
It's which while that's important, there are other movies that take place in late '70s,
Yeah,
early '80s New York that kind of give that gritty sense to it.
yeah, and I
One of
love
my
Gene
movies that
Hackman.
I really like.
Well, yeah, and I love Gene Hackman, but I think Popeye Doyle is more weird than iconic. Like it's not like a bad performance from Gene Hackman, but I don't think of Popeye Doyle as like, oh yes, that classic Gene Hackman role. It's more like he sure is a weirdo in that movie.
Which to that point, like when you're talking about Leonardo DiCaprio movies, like arguably maybe one of his better performances than this movie was The Aviator,
Hmm.
but he's playing a really weird guy, and I
Hmm.
don't like it as much.
That was Scorsese too, wasn't it? Who
Uh,
did Aviator? I think it was.
yep, it was.
Yep. Hmm.
Um,
He's made a lot of movies.
yeah, I mean he's great in a lot of these. I mean
Yeah.
but I wouldn't put any of them on the list. I
Yeah.
mean he's Inception might be fun as part of a different theme at some point.
Yeah. I do like Inception, although honestly, if we're going to go with mind-bendy Christopher Nolan movies, I The Prestige is my favorite.
Well, we can let's slate that for
Yeah.
maybe not next time, but a Prestige Inception watch.
Or even just like, I don't know, one of the things that we could do is like a focus, kind of like we did with Mission Impossible versus James Bond. We could say let's focus on one filmmaker and talk about their whole deal. We could do that.
That could be one. Yeah.
Um, I would have slightly mixed feelings about Christopher Nolan just because I don't think any of his movies are movies that I don't like, but I certainly like a few of them more than the rest. Um, but in any case, though, I think I agree that if we were talking about like crime movies, I think I still put the other Scorsese movies that are on the list higher than this one. But I agree. I think French Connection is one that I would exchange. Um, uh, it did great. It did really interesting things, but like, does a movie belong on the list for a single sequence?
It's a pretty cool sequence.
It is. It is.
And to be fair, at the time, like to make a gritty New York crime cop drama, something that we're so used to right now, like just it wasn't the norm when the movie came out, and it made that okay, partly because it had this really cool car chase. So I'm not saying it needs to be on the list anymore, but it does hold a little bit of cinematic weight beyond the car chase. Yeah.
Jack Nicholson was also in Chinatown.
Yes. Also very good in that too.
Yeah.
He's better in those movies than he is in this. I mean, he's great in this, but he's campy on
Well,
purpose.
I feel like I read somewhere in this about this movie that like he only agreed to do it if Scorsese would let him just like show up and just do whatever he wanted. And so
I,
he kind of was like a lot of his weird stuff was just improvised, which doesn't make it not great, but it certainly I hear that story and I believe it
I
watching
believe
his role.
it. Yeah,
Yeah. So, because there are definitely, performances in movies where if you told me it was improvised, I'd say, really? Wow, it doesn't look it. This one, like, yeah, 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 I believe it.
oh, yeah.
It's still great because he's great, but it definitely looks like he's just kind of, half the stuff he's doing, everyone else is just like, it plays right in the movie because it makes sense that all of the other characters are like, this guy's really important. I have to do whatever he says, but he's super weird and I never know what he's going to do at any given moment. And so the actors reacting to his performance like that works in scene.
Well, real fast, if you're right. 1 second. You
Okay,
can keep.
sure. So I think, I think we're on the same page generally. That like the movie does a lot of things really well, and that perhaps it could go on the list in place of, or at the very least, we would put it higher than one of the movies that was started on the AFI list. But I think the other movies on the list are still better. Although here's a slightly different reframing of that question because as we were just discussing, Matt Damon uh, he's on the list for Saving Private Ryan, but that's not much of a role. It's really not anything to do with him. It was almost kind of just a dumb coincidence that they cast this unknown actor in that role, even though he's like the titular role. But it was an unknown actor, and then Good Will Hunting came out before Saving Private Ryan came out, and everyone's just like, "Well, I guess that worked out." But so here's the question: if we were looking for the best Matt Damon performance, what is that? You think?
I mean, Good Will Hunting's tough to beat,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know that it's. I don't know. He's pretty good in the Bourne movies.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say they're like his like you're gonna put him on the list.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Talented Mr. Ripley is pretty good.
Pretty good
He's
at
pretty good at
that.
that.
I mean, The
Um,
Martian is pretty good in.
which one?
The Martian.
Oh, yeah. I was just looking at his list, and I'm remembering that in Thor Ragnarok, the Marvel movie, he has a bit part where he plays an Asgardian actor playing Loki, where it's
I'm
just
gonna go with
it's a
his
gag
cameo
cameo.
in Euro Trip.
That's pretty good. Scotty doesn't know.
It's got. I
Um,
mean, it's. He's good in the Ocean's movie. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Um,
I would say. I mean, Good Will Hunting like really put him on the map.
yeah.
It's hard to beat that. I mean, the Ocean's one, he's he's so good at what he's asked to do, but like to your point of like the Mark Wahlberg stuff, like the range of what he's doing in that movie is
Hmm.
not
Yeah.
great. You know,
Although, like, I think talented Mr. Ripley, out of all his performances, may be the most against type, but he still
yeah,
nails it.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, interesting that like neither of us actually. I guess we're the whole premise was comparing it to this one. Do we think this one would it be it? The Departed, is that his best?
I think it's his best now that we've kind of looked through him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think he's very good in some of the other ones, but he's doing less, you know, and that's not his fault necessarily. But
Yeah.
this one, he's asked to do more outside of talented Mr. Ripley.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You
but
know.
I think even in this one, like I think there's just the level that he can play. Like in the talented Mr. Ripley, like yeah, I think what Philip Seymour Hoffman's in that.
Oh
You
man,
know,
Philip Seymour Hoffman, gone too soon.
yeah. I mean, but he's
Jude
playing
Law
at
is
this.
also in that, and Gwyneth Paltrow, the other rest of the cast in
Yeah,
that movie.
sure. So another movie where he's playing, a round of golf with people who are few handicaps better than him, and he holds his own.
Well,
This one is definitely like I mean he holds his own in scenes that you might not think if you only watched him in Ocean's 11 and thought he was great, like that you
hmm
could think he could hold his own. So
I think like we sometimes talk about the distinction between a great actor and a great movie star, right? Like I think that there's always overlap, but you can kind of identify those two things as distinct categories. And I think that he's someone who is capable of doing great actor stuff, but takes mostly movie star roles. You know, where they're not most of the roles are not necessarily demanding like subtlety or complexity from him so much as do the thing really well. Like, be this person that the audience roots for really well.
yeah,
And he's good at that, but they don't demand as much from him as some of these other roles. I think Tom Cruise. I was trying to think of someone else that is a little bit like that, but Tom Cruise is just the sort of weirdo that takes movie star roles and just makes them acting exercises anyway by just like bringing the intensity to everything.
yeah,
Um,
unique person. So
yeah.
anyway,
So let's. I think we've probably covered the Departed then. So last question then we would address here is what comes next. And I think in our offline or off stream messages, you suggested like military war movies. I mentioned superhero movies, but I don't know. Did you have a military war movie in mind when you suggested that?
I didn't. I just started thinking about it, and without getting into too much detail, like I just finished a book that's fairly popular called "Can't Hurt Me."
Mm-hmm.
That
I'm not aware of it.
okay, well, it's about a guy who went from like a 300 pound, you know, uh, like what do you call it? Like not bug zapper, but pest control person
Okay.
to an elite
Exterminator.
Navy, yeah, exterminator, yeah, to an elite Navy SEAL, and then now does ultra marathons. And so it was just a really interesting story, and just but his whole time through the Navy SEALs was interesting, and And then just off chance, I watched Zero Dark 30 the
Mm-hmm.
other day, rewatched it. And honestly, like when you take out the sort of the part that's disconcerting on purpose, but does also detract from the movie about the torture
Mm-hmm.
part, like once you kind of like get yourself over that part of it, like the fact that the back hour of the movie, the called the Canaries, when they send the Navy SEALs in,
Mm-hmm.
not sure if it's going to be Bin Laden or not, but the whole point is like you're going to flag it up one way or the other, and then you got to get the hell out of there. But that military op is so well done that even though I've seen the movie before, like watching that again, like just thinking, I'm not saying that's the best war movie, but it just made me think of movies that like are really entertaining like that. And it's a Catherine Bigelow movie who did The
Mm-hmm.
Hurt Locker, which is also a very good war movie. So I just started, my mind started going that way.
Sure.
And that's why I floated
Well,
it to you.
so if we were to go with that, what movie do you think you would pick?
I was hoping you would pick first because I would hope that you would pick The Hurt Locker, which would allow
Oh,
me to pick something else.
well,
Because The Hurt
if
Locker is probably one of the best.
I'm not going to pick The Hurt Locker.
It's
Um,
so good.
well, I remember liking it. I have certainly not felt any desire to rewatch it.
Fair enough. Okay.
Which it, like I'm not. That's not a criticism. It's more just like it's an intense movie that has not didn't leave me feeling like I wanted more of that. But that's not a criticism. It's just it's some movies you are excited to rewatch and others is not as much. But
Well, and also, so the other part to it is like, obviously, like what prompted me to think of this was very much more modern
mm-hmm,
war movies. Like I read a modern Navy SEAL thing. I watched a modern Navy SEAL execute operation. Um, but there are ones like The Great Escape
yeah. Well,
that are older. Yeah.
and I mean I didn't mean to imply that I wouldn't want to rewatch Hurt Locker if you were going to choose that one. More just a matter of like that it wouldn't have been my choice. What I actually thought a little bit out was I almost kind of wanted to go a little bit off kilter, and I thought of two different ways to do that. One is Three Kings, which is the Iraq War movie with George Clooney and Ice Cube and
I do
uh,
remember thinking that, yeah, I was like, oh, wait, you'll pick that, not Hurt Locker. I do that. That actually did go through my head.
well, so that was one, but then the other one that I think I was actually leaning a little bit more towards is Starship Troopers, which is obviously science fiction, but it's certainly very military war themed science fiction. And I think it has some really interesting things to say about it because, certainly from a filmmaking perspective, there is sometimes this idea of is it possible to make an anti war movie, right? Because by depicting something on screen, you're sort of inherently glamorizing it in a way. And so the question just becomes like, well, is it possible to actually communicate an effective anti war message by depicting combat? But Starship Troopers, I'm not sure it's entirely going for that. But part of what I think is really interesting about it is that it is not merely satire of sort of jingoistic militarism in general, but it's actively satire of its own source material, which I think is really interesting. Plus, it's just a fun movie that I haven't watched in a while. You're kind of
So,
narrowing your eyes at me.
no, I'm reading the Rotten Tomatoes top rated.
Yeah, so I don't know that Starship Troopers is one that like belongs on the top 100 of list necessarily, but I think it would certainly be interesting to talk about. But Three Kings also would be. So I was kind of torn between those two if we were going to do military war movies. So would yours still be the Hurt Locker?
Yeah, especially when I'm looking at the Rotten Tomatoes thing, and it's like number 8,
Mm-hmm.
when number 7 is Doctor Strangelove. Dunkirk's on there,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't think is that good.
Yeah.
Casablanca's number 1. That's, I guess, technically.
Yeah, like that's frustrating because I feel like it takes place during wartime, but it's I wouldn't call it a war movie. Although I don't know, maybe I'm being overly petty about that, but yeah, I
No,
agree. Doctor Strangelove is so good. I also agree that Dunkirk is kind of style over substance.
it is the highest rated on Rotten Tomatoes of modern war movies, which is kind of where I was
Oh, Hurt
thinking.
Locker is, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the second highest rated of modern war movies on Rotten Tomatoes is Zero Dark 30.
Oh, I don't remember
Which I
liking
really
that one
enjoy.
very
I
much,
did
really.
enjoy that, and I
I mean,
do have
I don't
that.
want to overstate that. I guess I just sort of, I don't know. I felt a little bit like I was not in the place where I wanted to hear what that movie had to say to me. I think when I watched it.
That's what I was trying to say too. Is like
Hmm.
I agree. I the whole part about the conflicting part about like being very real with what detainee torture looked like and how
Hmm.
terrible it was, and then also the conflict of like, yeah, but it also helped do this.
Yeah.
And it does, I mean, it does a great job of what it's trying to do with it, like when you kind of once you've kind of seen it a few times and you can take your step
Hmm.
back, but it's also not a message that. But once I kind of put that aside and launched like the operational part of that part is
Hmm.
awesome.
Well,
But I'm not
so
trying to watch that again.
that's all right.
I would,
So if we were going to do superhero movies, I know that like it's a
yeah,
slightly
you'd have to pick them.
hmm?
You'd have to pick them. Just tell me what to watch.
Okay. Well, certainly I would pick one of them, but it would be I mean like it is a little bit different just in the sense that in a lot of other genres we have both seen a lot of movies, but like just especially when we talk about the more recent superhero movies, like since the inception of MCU or all of those, like you have not seen as many of them. But that's not to say, I mean, but that could be part of what we talk about, right? I think if we were going to talk about that, like Black Panther is one obvious possibility as a choice
I like
because
that one.
it's great. Um, but one of the ones that I was thinking might be a good, fun recommendation is Thor Ragnarok, which is the third in the series and certainly is well into the whole MCU continuity. But I don't think really all it requires is a willingness to just get on board with what's going on and not it doesn't really require the past knowledge. It'll tell you the things you need to know as long as you're willing to just hit the ground running a little bit. So I don't know. Do you have thoughts about that?
I'm open to it, but
Well,
hard for me to
so
decide because I haven't seen it. I don't know. So
yeah, I know. You
I
know,
will let you
uh,
choose what we do, knowing what that.
well, another theme that we could potentially do at some point in the future is each of us pick a movie that the other hasn't seen, but we think they should see it. But
I like that one for another one.
yeah, do you want to do that? Well, how about this? We keep that in mind for the future. Superheroes in mind for the future. Let's do our military war thing. I'll go with Starship Troopers.
I'll go with Hurt Locker.
All right. So next time, uh, talk war movies with quite a spectrum there. The only I think the third point of the triangle we would need is some like classic, World War II movie, like not Saving Private Ryan, but like one of the like,
Das Boot.
ooh, that wasn't what I was thinking. Although that is a really good movie.
Stalag 17 is pretty good. Great Escape's pretty good.
Yeah. See, yeah, something in like in the vein of The Great Escape was kind of what I was thinking. It's like a third point of the that triangle. Do we want to just say let's do all three of those?
Great Escape is the
Yeah.
third.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do
Let's do
that.
that. Awesome. Okay. So next time, three movies: The Great Escape, Starship Troopers, and The Hurt Locker
Yeah.
in
I
release
mean, the
order.
only thing we're missing is like Vietnam, but we've covered that with Apocalypse Now
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Platoon.
We had
I want
Apocalypse
to see
Now and
MASH.
Full Metal Jacket and Platoon on the list already.
Yeah, and MASH is technically
Oh
a,
yeah,
even though it takes place
yeah.
in the Korean War, it's meant to be a
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam movie. We've talked about that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So plenty of representation of that era
Yep.
already. Okay, so we'll leave it there. And in the meantime, thanks everyone for listening and or watching. and watch good movies.
See y'all later.